We're recording this on an April 1st, April Fool's Day, and for a lot of people, that's tomato planting day. Well, April Fools! It's still early for most people in the United States. Mother's Day is a much better day to plant, and here in California, well, we like late April. But we thought, well, there was a heat spell. In fact, there was a heat spill across the country, and a lot of people may have gotten the urge to plant tomatoes. Well, good luck to you with hailstorms and heavy rain and things like that between now and harvest time. But let's have our annual tomato preview show with our friend from Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. Don Shore is here. Don, we had an early summer, which today now has turned back into winter.
Yes, we're having an unusual spring here in the Sacramento Valley. We had temperatures 25 degrees above average for several days, actually a couple of weeks there in mid to late March. And now here it is early April, and we're dropping back down into the 60s as our high, not our low. Low temperatures over the next few days after we record this are going to be 41, 43, 44 degrees. So yes, there was a lot of early demand for summer vegetables. I can attest to that being a retailer. And we had a lot of conversations with people. We use some metrics for when to plant. Soil temperature 60 degrees, night temperatures above 55 or 60, daytime highs in the 80s.
Wait a minute here. Your nighttime temperature just shot up 5 or 10 degrees. For years, you've been telling us when the nighttime temperatures are steadily above 50 degrees, go ahead and plant. Sure enough, it was in that heat wave we had that lasted 3 weeks, it stayed over 50 at night. I wonder how many people took your advice on that.
Well, that was all those metrics in place. So they were buying, they were planting. My suggestion was we can get cold again. The soil can dip back down to a point that is not so great for summer vegetables. So your best bet if you're buying them is to hold on to them and keep them in a warm, sheltered place near your house. And I hate to have been proven right by the weather. Once again, it's come along and proven us right. And that's that conservatism with respect to putting them in the ground. Now, I have to say, I have a couple older guys who always plant by March 15th. If they haven't planted by March 15th, they think they're late. And you know what? They get results that are satisfactory to them. So I'm not going to argue with that part of it. But for best results, we plant tomatoes in April, peppers and eggplants in May, and that's when we start to plant them, not when we rush out to plant them. We have a long planting season here in the Sacramento Valley and, of course, interior Southern California, all over the coastal parts of California and many other parts of the United States. We can plant all the way into May. As you say, Mother's Day is a great day for planting in many cases. And I'm really even more concerned about the non-tomato summer vegetables, the peppers, the eggplant, the melons, things like that just sulk it for the whole season if they go into cold soil. Better is to buy your plants early. I understand. I'm never going to talk someone out of buying vegetable plants. Get them in a sheltered place near your house, a warm front porch or something like that, whatever your spouse will tolerate. And this is really important. Keep them moving into bigger pots, because if you buy them in a little 3-inch or 4-inch or even worse, the little 6-packs, you've got a very small root system there. And in my opinion, you're at least a couple weeks away, if not a few weeks away from putting them in the ground. So what I do is they go up into a bigger pot right away. If they're in a 6-pack, they go into a quart pot. If they're in a 4-inch pot, they go into a 1-gallon container. And the one expense that I would expend at this time of year would be a higher grade potting soil. You go to that garden center that you're fond of and you buy the stuff that they sell to the fancy plant growers, the people who want the extra nitrogen in their soil mix. And that's great for getting a seedling tomato or pepper or eggplant going off to a better start. And you'll have a bigger root system and a healthier plant that can go in the ground 2, 3, 4 weeks later when the temperatures are really more appropriate.
And soil temperature should be part of your detective work as well, because during this last heat wave in March, you could stick your soil thermometer in and it was still winter, 6 inches down, 8 inches down. The temperatures were still in the 50s.
Yeah, and we want them to go into warm soil and start growing right away. So there's two aspects of that. One is soil temperature and the other is soil moisture. We ran into a lot of problems last year with people simply not watering adequately shortly after they put the little seedlings in because the soil was very dry. We started the growing season without much rainfall. Sound familiar? And so the soil around your little plant was dry and people were going out and giving them a little, coffee cups worth of water with their drip system every day or every other day and never giving a deeper or wider watering. So the first thing was putting them into soil that was too cold. The second thing was inadequate depth in some cases, frequency of irrigation. We also ran into nitrogen deficiencies last year for other reasons. But the first thing is to hydrate everything really thoroughly before you plant. Water really thoroughly ahead of time. Plant them, give them good soakings, even though it's a little baby plant. And it's important that there be some source of nitrogen in there and that you not put them in when the soil is too cold for you to sit on it. So those are your basics right there. There's a lot of things you don't need to do. One thing you do need to do is not jump the gun.
What's the latest that you've planted a tomato plant?
August 1st.
How did that go?
It was great. It was a vigorous plant that I had in a gallon can. It was something, left over at my garden center. It was 3 feet tall when it went in the ground. So I dropped it down a good foot plus into the ground, gave it a very thorough soaking. And I did check it, needless to say, every day for the first couple of weeks while it was getting going. It grew, it flowered well mid-September, and I was harvesting that fruit in late October and early November. So a reminder to listeners outside of this area, our season goes pretty much well through the month of October in the Sacramento Valley. So you don't have that kind of late season, what we used to call Indian summer, the warm, dry conditions on into the fall. Maybe this isn't for you, but I have planted with no problem through June and even the 1st of July. And I did as an experiment plant some plants on the 1st of August and got good results with those. So I plant all the way through June. And I do usually one last planting of some of my determinate, we'll get to that in a moment, varieties that you're using mainly for canning, sauces, processing in June, so that I'll be harvesting those August, September. And the other tomato plants are just plugging along, still doing their thing, that we put in back in April and May.
Speaking of the early maturing plants, the determinate varieties that tend to set most of their fruit at one time, one variety that I will be planting again this year in my barrels next to the garage will be Bush Early Girl, because I can stick those in the ground usually around April 1st, but I won't do it today because it's pouring rain. But they only take 54 days to mature. Most of the fruit sets at one time, and it's a fairly compact plant too. It only gets maybe 4 feet tall, maybe 5 feet tall, if that. And you can have a nice early harvest of that while your others are maturing.
Yeah, these Bush versions of older varieties, I've been testing them one by one. Bush Champion was very good. Bush Early Girl, very good. There's a Bush Celebrity that I was impressed with last year. And Celebrity is one I've had some skepticism about over the years. These all seem to be just tighter internode distances, so I'm not sure whether they're truly determinate or just more or less a dwarf or indeterminate type, but they do tend to have a heavy blossom and a heavy set, so functionally they are like determinate tomatoes. And each one of them has been an improvement in some ways. The Bush Early Girl seems to have a tighter growth habit, which helps protect the fruit from sunburn, especially the Bush Celebrity. I noticed that. Celebrity is a plant that's very popular with some gardeners. I stock it, but it's never been one of my highest ranked ones because of the problem with the fruit sunburn. I've had issues with sun scald during any kind of normal high temperature event here. Any of the fruit on the west side just scorches real badly. Well, the Bush one has a tighter growth habit, and that does help to protect some of the fruit a little bit from sunburn. And in each case, they've also bred in a disease package, as they call it. Now, these are getting confusing for people shopping online and looking at all these seeds with these names like gray leaf spot and tomato apex necrosis virus and septoria leaf spot and so forth. These are more of a problem for East Coast gardeners, more of a problem for people in summer rainfall areas. But they also have generally bumped up the fusarium resistance, which is important to us, and in some cases, more nematode tolerance. So it's getting a little bit of an alphabet soup as you're buying tomato seeds online. But this greater disease resistance does have some advantages, especially for people who get the leaf and stem diseases. And that's something they bred into each of these Bush types, including the Bush Early Girl, Bush Celebrity, and I believe Bush Champion.
You talked a lot about the importance of watering, especially young tomato plants. In the news this week, Denver, Colorado is instituting water restrictions because of the drought. They're talking about limiting household outdoor watering to 2 days a week. Give us some strategies for if you're dealing with a situation where you may be limited in the days of the week you can water, and maybe the amount of water you put on. What are some strategies for making your water work the hardest?
The first thing would be to see whether they actually are restricting drip irrigation systems, because when drought restrictions have been imposed in California, they've typically exempted drip watering systems from the days of the week or the time of day ordinances simply because they're more efficient, and in many cases because they're being used to grow food plants. So that would be the first question I would have immediately if I lived in the Denver region. is, does this actually mean I can't run my drip system on my vegetables every day? I suspect they're probably exempt. The second would be figure out some way to retain the moisture. And that generally does involve adding organic material, either turning it in around the plant when you plant. Not usually necessary here, but that might be something to think about there. And most especially mulching with not just organic material. Some kind of compost is great, but anything else that'll help shade the soil and keep the moisture in when you do apply it. I do like to water deeply and go a few days between waterings. I could probably on my soil get by with twice a week irrigation with tomatoes if I gave them several gallons all at once when I do. But the question would be whether in your soil where you're listening, whether it will retain moisture that long. Mulch will help with that. My favorite mulch here is straw because I can get it inexpensively and it shades the soil and it breaks down and builds the soil. But whatever works for you, arborist wood chips, compost that you made yourself, compost that you buy or get from your local municipal landfill, Yolo County, for example, they give away compost. That's all it is. It's just compost. No nutrients, no manure, nothing, but something to help put on the surface, help retain moisture and retain nutrients. Doesn't provide them. That's an important distinction, but it does help to retain both moisture and nutrients.
I save the neighborhood's leaves. They collect in my backyard. And I use that as mulch, 3 to 4 inches of mulch of oak leaves that I've run over with the mower or the weed whacker. And that's great insulation for the soil. It keeps the weeds from coming up. It maintains more even soil moisture, more even soil temperature. And as it breaks down, it feeds the soil too.
Yeah, and they do improve all of those things we talked about. Cation exchange capacity is just the soil's ability to retain nutrients, and they build cation exchange capacity. And when you water, they help to hold the water in the area. And you can go as deep as you want. I mean, if you've got a foot of leaves around your tomato plant, it doesn't hurt. You're not going to harm anything by putting stuff on the surface. So that would be the first and the simplest thing I would do. Also, water effectively. We have more conversations about irrigation problems every summer than almost anything else. People come in, they think they have a disease or a pest, and our first question is, how are you watering? And my favorite lines are things like, I don't know, pretty good. What we meant was, what are you using to water with? How long are you running it? What is the output? Fairly technical questions. So I put on at least a couple gallons of water every time I irrigate my tomatoes and my peppers and my eggplant so that I'm going past the root zone in both depth and width. I want to get water out and down so the roots will go out and down. Key principle, roots won't grow into dry soil. This is a lot more of a problem in raised planters for people than in the open ground because raised planters tend to be filled with very sandy mix that had compost in it when you bought it, but that stuff has broken down. You're probably going through this with your planters about now because you put them in, 3-4 years ago?
No, almost 10 years ago, 9 years ago, to be exact. And I've been amending them every year with more compost and worm castings. So I like the tilth of what I got right now.
That's the key, is you keep doing that every season, whether it's once a year in the spring for the summer vegetable garden or both spring and fall. I use cover crops too, and they're very beneficial because the roots get in there and they break down and they add some nitrogen and they typically have a lot of biomass themselves. But just spreading stuff on the surface, and it doesn't make that much difference what it is if you're just putting it on the surface. If you're incorporating it, it should have some kind of nitrogen in it. And that's the big difference between buying something in a bag from a garden center and going and getting free compost from the municipal waste system. In a bag, you're almost sure to find chicken manure or bat guano or something added that enhances the nutrients and gets your plants off to a better start. I'm also a big fan of 1 dose of soluble fertilizer a couple weeks after planting. So in my case, I've taken using fish emulsion in recent years, but it could be almost any of a number of branded products that you like out there. Once they're rooted in, you've gone past your transplant wilt, it takes a few days. You then give it a feeding with some kind of soluble fertilizer, and that seems to make a big difference as well. Get those young plants off to a good start. Don't stress the young plant with lack of irrigation. That can make a season-long difference when you don't give it enough water.
If you are new to drip irrigation, trust me, you don't want to be using a single emitter per plant. You want to run 2 parallel lines on either side of your row of plants with the emitters sort of spaced intermittently along the line. And usually they're spaced 12 inches apart. Well, that's fine. Yeah. Just put that second line, maybe 6 inches further one way or the other so that you get more coverage of that area. And you mentioned facetiously earlier about people go out and add a coffee cup of water to their plants. And in a drip irrigation system with only one 1-gallon emitter, and you only have it on for 15 or 20 minutes, that's what you get is a coffee cup of water.
The most popular brand, not to dump on them, but the most popular brand is Netafim. And the most popular installed version of that seems to be the 0.4 gallon per hour output of emitterized tubing. And typically those are 1 foot apart. So you're putting on a little less than half a gallon of water every foot. Now, it takes an inch of water, 0.62 gallons per square foot, to get about a foot of penetration. So you'd have to run that little guy there an hour and a half to give it a foot and a half of penetration. If you have more of them, that helps. If you run it for a good long time, that makes a big difference. And the most common thing we hear is I have a drip system I'm running for 10 or 15 minutes. That's not enough to water anything. But this is really simple to test. You don't have to calculate it or get all muddied on the math. One guy said, nobody told me there'd be math in this. What you do is you go out the next day after it runs, and either you buy a Farmer Fred soil probe, or you take a trowel and you dig down and see how far you were able to penetrate. Or you even can take a screwdriver that's 18 inches long and stick that in the soil and see how far it goes in and whether it's moist down there. The soil probe would probably be your most effective and efficient way to determine exactly what you've done. But even a trowel will show you, wow, I only got about 6 inches depth of watering. Now, thanks to capillary action, it'll spread out a little more than that, but it won't be enough to sustain the plant and especially the new growth and get that plant off to a good start. So every now and then, run it for a lot longer. And in general, if you're running your system less than 35 or 40 minutes, you're not getting any kind of adequate depth of irrigation. More typically, mine is running for 1 to 2 hours. With my soil, every few days, that works well. But you do have to calibrate it to your own exposure, your own soil type. So
remember, we're talking about drip irrigation here. If you're running an overhead sprinkler system, that's a different calculation.
Some very successful gardeners I know never use drip. They plant their tomato as if it were a tree. They put a basin around it by just building up a ridge of soil to make, about a 3-foot diameter area where they can set a hose and let it flow. And they're giving that plant anywhere from 2 to 5 gallons all at once, usually at a moderate trickle or moderate flow. And they do that every few days. So they're treating the plant individually like a deep-rooted, almost as if it were a woody plant. And that works very, very well. These are big vines. A tomato vine grown to full potential in our area can go 10 to 12 feet, but it can only do that if it can run its roots 3 to 4 feet down, 3 to 4 feet out, which they are capable of doing. This is your standard indeterminate tomato. Determinate or dwarf tomatoes probably don't need as much water. General recommendation I've seen for those is 5 to 6 gallons a week total, whereas an indeterminate type, 10 to 12 gallons per week. And that's been my experience. So if you're trying to conserve water, listening in Denver or someplace like that, plant a determinate type. You can water it somewhat less. More to the point, you can harvest early and kind of be done with them and process those and put them in the freezer. And then you don't have to water all the way through the summer. It really depends on what your goal is, what your main purpose is in growing tomatoes. Do you want a fresh tomato every day through October? Or do you do a whole bunch of sauce all at once in August and then you're done?
Speaking of dwarf, I'm growing, for me, new dwarf varieties, all with the word Fred in their name. It's from the Dwarf Tomato Project, and I had so many different ones to try, thanks to our friend Charlie in Brooklyn, who sent us some seeds of that. And this year I'm planting, and they're up in their little containers right now. Fred's tie-dye tomato, Brandy Fred, and Wild Fred.
Are you sure that he didn't just write that on there? This is actually part of their name?
Well, according to the story of the founder of the Dwarf Tomato Project, Craig LeHoulier, his father was a minister by the name of Wilfred, and there was a humorous misspelling of his name in a church bulletin, so he had to name those tomatoes after that mistake.
There you go. I've done a few of these. This is a great new project. It's you might call it an open source breeding project. A bunch of breeders around the world are sharing genetic stock and sharing results and putting it out into the open. These are not patented or anything like that. So it's a fascinating project, and they're aiming for compact plants that are, I guess, determinate or dwarf indeterminate. They're going to vary somewhat in that regard. I've grown a couple of the early ones that came out and some others that are from this same idea. The dwarf Tasmanian chocolate was one that I grew. Let's see, I had one Marzito, which looked exactly like a little 1-inch San Marzano. They were great. I mean, the plant only produced about 20 or 30 of them, but it was also only about 16 inches. And so these really have potential. We've always had a market in the retail end of things for people who want to grow a tomato. And I had a little flashback the other day when someone walked in and said, "What do you think of that topsy-turvy tomato planter?" And I almost burst out laughing. I thought, I haven't heard about that thing in a couple of years. Well, the problem with it was they were showing people planting normal sized tomatoes in a thing that only held 1 cubic foot of soil. In general, my experience has been to grow any kind of a tomato in a container, it needs to be at least 1.5 cubic feet of soil. That's what the earth box holds, and that seems to work for a lot of people. Anything less than that is just going to be constant watering, except these dwarf types, very compact plants. They're typically 1.5, maybe 2 feet tall, maybe three. They're bushy little things. They don't really need a cage of any kind. I've done them in barrels, even mixed with other things. I did one in a barrel with a basil plant and a shishito pepper last year, a half barrel. That worked fine. And it produced, as I say, 20, 25 fruits, small fruit, tasty. So these are not going to be enough to give you a year's supply, but it's a great way to go if you're limited for space. And there's always a market for people who are trying to grow tomatoes and might live in an apartment, have a balcony only, something like that. So we're going to try these. How many are you doing?
I'm doing 3 of them, and one of them was developed here in California, so I have high hopes for the dwarf wild Fred, which is an indeterminate, it says here, and it takes 85 days to mature, and it produces 8-ounce tomatoes. And so it was developed by Bruce Bradshaw in 2005. It was a cross between New Big Dwarf and Carbon.
The New Big Dwarf is apparently the parent of quite a lot of these. It was a dwarf tomato from about 100 years ago. And it turned out to be an important part of the parentage of many of these that we're getting. What I'm really hoping, and I'm hoping people will try these, crowdsource them, send us your results. How do they take the heat? I mean, that's really our key question with any new tomato variety. Does it set above 85 or 90 degrees? 85 degrees is about the upper threshold for brandy wine and certain other tomatoes that simply don't yield well here in the valley because we're almost always above 85 in the summertime. Does the variety go into the low 90s and still set fruit well? Does it fruit all at once at the end of the season, or does it give us sort of a steady sampling? So we'll expect full results at the end of the summer from all these different dwarf types.
The other one I'm growing is called Fred's Tie-Dye, which is a cross between Fred's wild tomato and the Pink Berkeley.
And that Pink Berkeley tie-dye is an interesting one. I have a list of tomatoes that I have to stock every year because they're always requested by customers. Pink Berkeley tie-dye is definitely one of those. To me, it's somewhat acidic. I mean, it's a pretty tart tomato. It's never been a super high yielding one, although the fruit is beautiful. And, the 10 or 12 that you get are big and they're very flavorful. So it's in that category. It's right up there with, Sun Gold, Super Sweet 100, Yellow Pear, San Marzano. If I don't have those, these guys are going to get grumpy. So I always get Pink Berkeley tie-dye. And it does have its own following. I don't think that was a Wild Boar Farms introduction, but I know that he does grow it. Can't remember whether he introduced it or just produces it because it kind of fits in his style.
Yeah, actually, I think he did. I think Brad Gates did develop the Pink Berkeley tie-dye.
Oh, okay, because there's been the Berkeley tie-dye forever. So this one is an improvement or a selection. What he does, of course, is he finds interesting seedlings of these heirlooms, sees if they're stable, grows them out until they're a stable variety, and then introduces them. And this is one that I've gotten through him every year. And as I say, certain customers absolutely want that one. It's got its own special following, like San Marzano. Now, I can predict who's going to want San Marzano. You come from northern Italy. Pink Berkeley tie-dye is a different demographic.
Speaking of Brad Gates, Wild Boar Farm paid a visit to Redwood Barn Nursery recently.
Yes, he's out there delivering around, and there's probably a dozen or more of us in the area that carry his amazing and fascinating tomatoes, and I grow them all one by one. I've grown almost all of them. There's some of his that have become absolute favorites of mine. Pork chop, sweet Carneros pink, Michael Pollan, very interesting, unusual fruit. When you're following our sage advice to diversify your portfolio when you plant your tomatoes, plant several varieties, not just one thing. Never understand these guys who plant like 6 celebrity and nothing else. That might be the year celebrity doesn't do well. So diversify it with some unusual things and look for the Wild Boar Farm ones because some of them are just fascinating. And they tend to be very heavy producers for me, I think partly because Brad is a farmer from this area. So he's selecting them for farming as well as for their interest to home gardeners. We got 4 or 5 new ones from him this year. Apollo's Chariot, Copper Olive, and that picture is fascinating. Cosmic Burst I grew last year. This is a very colorful one. It's green anthos splash, as he puts it. They ripen yellow, then they're purple stripe. You can eat them then, or you can wait till they're more red. It's one of these types. It changes color as it goes further along. My staff loved that one last year. Cosmic Burst was a big hit with everybody when I took them in. Again, it's a 2 to 3 ounce, so bigger than a cherry, but not a super large fruit. And then a couple other really colorful ones: Eye Candy, which is a 3 to 5 ounce, and Solar Vortex, which is, I don't even know how to describe the colors on this. This looks like something from the 1970s.
What are you growing this year for cherry tomatoes?
Well, there are so many good cherry tomatoes out there that it's getting a little challenging. For a long time, it was just, you want a cherry tomato? Buy Sun Gold or buy Sweet 100. Well, those are two very good ones, Sun Gold and Super Sweet 100. It has the disease resistance. And I get customers who want yellow pear. That does extremely well, although I find it fairly insipid. But I have found that there's a new one it's an old one that he's reintroduced called Tim's Taste of Paradise. And if you want a cherry tomato with exceptional vigor and extremely high productivity, look for Tim's Taste of Paradise. You want Sun Gold, but more fruit? Tim's Taste of Paradise is a great choice. And people were raving about it. It was very interesting, the response I got on that one. It's sort of like Sun Gold, but easier to pick, a little less musky smelling. There's a interesting smell to Sun Gold that some people have noticed, and extremely high yield. 2 years ago, Tim's Taste of Paradise was my most vigorous tomato, and it produced 1,000 fruit. It was one of that kind of thing. So it's a very, very good one if you can find it. Of course, you can't go wrong with Sun Gold itself, or any of the Sweet 100 or Super Sweet 100 crowd, or even better is the Sweet Million.
Interesting smell really isn't a selling point.
I don't say that when I'm talking to customers.
All right. I'm going to just stick with an old heirloom Gardener's Delight as my small tomato in my garden this year.
That's a very good one.
Yeah, I like Gardener's Delight. It performs year after year.
And if you want one that's ridiculously productive, before Tim's Taste of Paradise, we grew Cupid, and I think you grew that one. Mm-hmm. It was a very, very, very high producer for me the year I grew it. The thing about cherry tomatoes is most people have no idea how big they get and how vigorous they are. If you're in an area that's marginal for tomatoes, cherry tomatoes are your best bet. I got someone listening to my radio show who wanted to know what I'd recommend for the Central Coast. I said, cherry tomatoes are probably your best bet. They grow well almost anywhere. But in the valley here, you're talking about a 10 to 12 foot vine that definitely needs a large support of some sort. It will produce, I'm not exaggerating when I say 800 to 1,000 fruit. It's going to produce more than anybody could know what to do with. So when I see someone buying 2 or 3 or 4 cherry tomatoes, I think, this will be an interesting learning experience for them. Any of those are good. It depends on the style you like. My dad always liked regular red cherry, and then one called Basket Pack. He insisted that I give him a 6-pack of Basket Pack every year.
6-pack?
That's a 6-pack in coastal San Diego, yeah. And, which is 5.5 more than you need. And it was an extremely productive, large cherry tomato. For those of you in the coastal zones, if your nursery sells Basket Pack, I can tell you from his experience, it does extremely well in the coastal areas. It does very well here as well. But, Gardener's Delight is a really good one that we should start repopularizing. It's been around for quite a while. Very sweet, very productive, and not an overwhelming plant.
Yeah, well, it is indeterminate, though, but it'll last, even though it starts in the early season, it'll be one of the last ones to produce for you.
Right. So I did have a question that we wanted to be sure to answer from someone who listens to both of our shows. His mom wants 2 tomatoes. She's not the gardener, he is.
Okay.
And all she does with tomatoes is slice them for sandwiches or cut them in wedges for a salad.
2 tomato plants.
2 tomato plants.
And she's not the gardener.
Correct.
Okay.
He's going to take care of them.
All right. Okay. Good son. All right.
Right. That's what I said. So to me, that means a firm texture because you're slicing it or wedging it. And so you want something that'll hold up when you take that slice through the middle and put it in your sandwich. And for wedging, you don't want tomatoes that are going to fall apart in the salad. So she wants something, in my opinion, with some texture. And to me, she probably is looking for a sweeter style, perhaps, than a tart style. But more to the point, she also just only wants like 1 tomato every couple days. She doesn't need, this isn't canning or freezing or anything like that. She wants a variety that's going to produce steadily, consistently for as long into the season as he can keep them going. By the way, he's in Santa Rosa, so a very similar climate to here. A little more coastal fog, he said, but other than that, basically just as hot as we get. So I thought about that, and personally, my feeling was that was almost exactly what the Chef's Choice tomato series was bred for.
That's good.
Chef's Choice implies usable for slicing, dicing, chopping, all that kind of thing, rather than being more of a sauce or puree type of tomato. And the Chef's Choice are amazing. Every one that's come on the market has been very high yielding, at least here in the Valley. Still, the very first one that they introduced is, in my opinion, the very best. Chef's Choice Orange, high production, 50-60 fruit, 3/4 pound piece, sometimes more than that. I've only had 1 year where it didn't produce real well, and great for slicing, a lot of that connective tissue that holds the slice together. But it's orange, and I don't know whether orange will be acceptable. So they also have Chef's Choice Red and Chef's Choice Pink. I think the orange one is better than those two, but they're both very good. They're both very large fruit, and they both yielded very well for me. They're just a little bit softer, but I still think they would be suitable. But what would you use for a sandwich and salad tomato?
I like the New Girl because it has a good size and it produces consistently throughout the season. It's an indeterminate, so that will suffice her for her tomatoes every couple of days from June through October, November, probably.
Yeah.
I'm wondering, what is the largest that you can think of paste tomato?
Well, so far, Rugby, which is one we've mentioned now for a couple of years. Yeah,
there we go.
Rugby. And you can, by the way, folks, I know Fred and I have been talking about this one for about 3-4 years now. You can get the seed online. Your average local garden center is not going to have this one because they haven't heard of it and the big growers don't do it. It was introduced from Bulgaria, of all places. But you can get the seed from Seeds and Such and some other online vendors, and it's worth it. It's a very large sauce-type tomato. It's large enough for slicing, either direction, or wedging and putting in a salad. So it would hold up and wouldn't fall apart in a salad. Super impressed with Rugby since it came on the market. It's become one of our top sellers because we buy the seed bulk and we grow it ourselves. But you can do that yourself. You can grow it quite easily and you still have plenty of time for that. Rugby are 5 to 6 ounce fruit, sometimes even bigger, and they're very solid. And so far, I've had good results with it every single year. So I've been very happy with that one. The plant only gets 5 to 6 feet, produces quite a lot of fruit. That's a very good one that could be a dual purpose tomato. The other one I thought of was a very old one. I mean, if you'd asked me this question 20 years ago, I probably would have said Ace. Ace 55. The variety's been around forever. And it's DF, it's got some resistance to soil diseases, and it's good for slicing. It's always described as low acid, which it probably isn't technically, but it might just be a higher sugar content. It's determinate. So if you're limited for space, Ace gets about 4 feet for me. I actually put it in a smaller cage every time I grow it. And every time I grow it, I'm reminded how consistent it is. 10, 15, 20 fruit over the course of the season, sets right on in through the summer. You're still picking 1 or 2, in September or even as late as October, and a very good quality for slicing and probably for wedging for salads as well. So you want a reliable, old-fashioned performer, Ace is very good for those purposes as well.
Well, we've got to specify it's Ace 55 because as one letter writer asked me, where can I find Ace? All that's available is Ace 55. And it's true. Yeah. Ace 55 was developed about 10 years after the original Ace, which was developed by Campbell's Soup Company here in Sacramento back in 1954. And it was fine for making soup because it was rather thin-skinned. But for home gardeners, well, the Ace 55 came along in the 1960s and has stuck around now for a few years.
That thicker skin has some advantages, especially from a commercial production standpoint. Thicker skin is going to resist bacterial penetration if there's any kind of injury, like hail or something like that. It will handle the harvesting process pretty well. So there are some advantages to that, but I can understand a preference for a thinner skin. That thicker skin is one of the characteristics of Champion, which I would have mentioned also for slicing and for wedges. It is a tougher tomato. One of the reasons I like it, in fact, is it always sets late for me. And that fruit will be hanging on there in November and even into as late as December some years because that tougher skin helps it to hold up against the elements. But for the thinner skin, if I were her, I'd probably try Celebrity. My guess is that they would probably find Celebrity has a thinner skin and might be more to their liking.
All right. Now, I'm growing one this year you recommended or you had good success with last year that might fit her criteria as well. And I'm going to be planting. It's been a few years, but give it another shot. Cherokee Purple.
Cherokee Purple was my top performer in 2023. And I say top performer, I just stacked up my tomato cages. I have 35 tomato cages. Somehow I fill them every year. So that's roughly what I'm growing every year. That's comparing it with hybrids, comparing it with well-known hybrids, and it was my top producer in 2023. Interestingly, 2024, my top producer was Lemon Boy. And last year, my top performer was Carmelo, which is an old, actually French hybrid. Cherokee Purple, it's an heirloom, so I would never promise, oh, this will be your top yielder, because generally heirlooms don't produce as many fruit, but that has been very consistent for me. And people love the flavor. It's a beautiful fruit, softens at a moderate pace. So if someone got it a little on the firmer side, they'd probably be happy with it for sandwiches and salads and things like that. Then you can let it ripen very, very soft. And so, yeah, I highly recommend Cherokee Purple. People still want the heirlooms for the flavor. But the problem here in California, especially the Sacramento Valley, is a lot of the heirlooms, like Brandywine, some of the really well-known ones, just don't set well at our normal high temperatures here. Well, Cherokee Purple does. In most years, I've had good results with Mortgage Lifter as well if someone is looking for another heirloom type. Be cautious about too many heirlooms. They're mostly East Coast. They're mostly from places that aren't as extremely dry and hot as we are in the summer here. And so there's a tendency for them not to produce real well. But that one in particular, Cherokee Purple, I've been very impressed with.
Yeah, I forget who said all gardening is local, but they're right.
Yeah.
All right. I'm trying 2 new ones this year that I have hopes will make it through if the summer gets scorching hot. I am growing the Jolene, as I mentioned earlier, and
Jolene.
Heatmaster.
Yeah, Heatmaster I have done. Heatmaster has set well for me, even into the low to mid 90s. It's a good fruit. I can't remember how big the plant got, but that one I did have good feedback on. Don't know about Jolene. Sounds great. You've already got me humming the song here. But that's from Johnny's, right?
Johnny's Selected Seeds has Jolene. And I believe Jolene's is a determinate. I may have that wrong, so I'm going to check on that just in case. But that Heatmaster is a very nice one that, as far as size goes, it only gets about 4 feet tall. And it is a determinate. So here's one, even though it takes 75 days to maturity, so it's not an early ripening variety, but still, it's not going to overwhelm a cage or a backyard like Cupid would.
Yeah, some people need to understand that the tomato plant is capable of growing to 10 to 12 feet here if you're planting a regular indeterminate type. And if you put one of those cute little tomato cages you buy at the hardware store on it, it'll be out the top of that by June. But you've got the whole summer still to grow. So we find a lot of our customers are steering towards determinate types just because they're limited for space. You do have to bear in mind that they won't produce all summer typically, but they'll give you a whole lot of fruit early on, and then perhaps you can utilize that space for something else. I'm looking at Johnny's, and I snagged one on here where the phrase that caught my attention was great heat setting ability on a determinate sauce tomato called Cuzco, Kuzko, Cuzco. Great heat setting ability. What we're referring to there is that somewhere around 90 degrees, a lot of the pollen tubes just won't develop properly. A lot of tomatoes simply will not pollinate at high temperatures. And remember that our average high temperature here in the month of July is 91 to 93 degrees, depending on where you are in the valley. And that's above the temperature for a lot of tomatoes to set. That's why Brandywine, that's why beefsteak simply don't do well here. They grow fine, they flower fine, and then you watch the flowers drop off from lack of pollen development. It's not a need for a pollinator. Tomatoes are self-pollinating. Just the air movement takes care of that. So you grow these plants and they grow and grow and grow, and you're watching the blossoms fall off. Then finally, maybe in September, late August, when we cool down, you do get a crop at that point. A lot of people give up by then. So I'm always looking for ones that set well in the heat and produce early, and preferably a more compact growth habit, something that I think a lot of home gardeners might find beneficial. A cherry tomato that grows 15 feet is fun to grow, but if you put a 4-foot cage on it, your garden's kind of a jungle.
Yeah, to finish my thought out on the Jolene, it does produce a pretty good sized fruit, 8 to 10 ounces, and it has all sorts of resistance to every sort of initial you could think of. Fusarium, the famous TYLCV, tomato yellow leaf curl virus, and of course, everybody's favorite around here, verticillium resistance. It is a determinate tomato, which means it's going to set the majority of its fruit at one time.
It is, but I have found that when I leave those in, you still get some fruit later in the season. So I want people to understand you don't have to rush to pull out a determinate type. If it's still growing, still flowering, you'll get some fruit after that main big crop of it. So that's the first thing. And it sounds like it's got a good growth habit. The 3 to 4 foot cage would be fine for that. I still want it to be something sturdier than those funny little things that most places sell. It'd be nice if it was made out of, let's say, concrete wire that you then stake securely, because even at a 4-foot cage, the amount of foliage and size of the plant can be little tippy if we get one of our characteristic valley north winds, but these are more manageable for a lot of people.
I was trying to think of why you would have differing success each year with a different variety. Were all of those winning varieties you've had each year planted in the same spot?
I avoid that because I'm able to do that. I can just move my whole garden if I need to because I live on a farm. But most of my customers, their choice for rotation is limited. I just make sure I haven't planted in the same spot for 2 to 3 years in a row if I possibly can. And I say that to a lot of people, and I realize they have one box in their backyard. If they're lucky, they have two. So alternating between them would be good. You could be developing a nematode problem, so that's something to watch for. You could have disease problems in the soil. More commonly, what we're just encountering is lack of nutrients. So people think they have a disease, they think they have a pest problem. They're not seeing any signs of nodules on the roots. The plants are not yellowing or showing any dieback. They're just not thriving. And I say that typically that's from lack of nitrogen. Now, many years ago, I would tell people not to feed too much because I was concerned about heavy use of sulfate of ammonia, things like that, getting extremely vigorous plants that then would not produce well. Now it's way at the other end. People are almost entirely using organic fertilizers, which is fine, but they're slower to react. And they're often not using anywhere near enough of them. So it's very important to give the plants a supplement of nitrogen at the time of planting and a little bit more as they're getting going. And many of you will probably need to feed a couple more times, lightly, side dress, as they say in the biz, with some source of nitrogen in the mid part of the season, if it's an indeterminate plant, if you're going to try and keep it going all through the summer and into the fall, especially if you're in a raised planter. You notice how we keep coming back to that.
Yes.
Because it runs out of nutrients. I mean, we had a lot of people jump into vegetable gardening with COVID 6 years ago. They bought big planters and planter boxes and kits and all this kind of stuff, and they called the nursery or they called the rock yard and they got something delivered. Whatever they got delivered by now is mostly mineral. Almost all the compost has long since disintegrated and broken down, and you're essentially growing your plants in sand or a sandy loam. And if you're Fred, you know that you need to add nitrogen every year. You need to add more compost every year. But if you aren't adding enough, if you're not continuing to get that in there, the plant performance will decline from year to year, mostly from lack of nutrients. It's possible from problems on the roots. It's not a bad idea to pull up a plant at the end of the season, check the roots for those very visible nodules from root knot nematode or something like that. But more commonly, what we're seeing, aside from the lack of irrigation or inadequate depth of irrigation, is inadequate nitrogen.
Which is why I have upped my fertilization schedule for this year from once a month to twice a month. So my plants are going to get fed on the 1st and the 15th.
There you go. And you're using a soluble plant food of some sort?
I'm using the neighborhood cat's favorite, fish emulsion.
Squished fish. Yes.
Yeah, squished fish. Yes. All I have to do is shake that jug and they come running.
Well, yeah, we grow tomatoes and we're growing them organically in our nursery. And once we used fish emulsion in the nursery, we don't do that. But it's a very good fertilizer. Highly recommend it for home gardeners.
Exactly. Now, there's the world famous Don Shore winner test. You don't declare a tomato a winner until it's done well at least 3 years in a row, correct?
Correct.
All right. What tomatoes are on the verge of that 3-year record right now?
Carmelo is definitely getting up there. 2 years in a row, it's done extremely well for me. And I'm going to do it again this year. Carmelo is an old hybrid that has become, I think, open pollinated. This is a little confusing to people. Class is an heirloom. It's fine. It's old enough. Carmelo, which has been around for a long time, 8-ounce fruit, red. You know, there's a lot of competition in that market for this medium-sized red tomato. I was very impressed with it, both 2025 and 2024. So that one is going to get a 3rd year this year. Lemon Boy, 2 years in a row, among my top producers. If you like that style of fruit, it's one of the best producing yellow tomatoes there is. So it's definitely moved up onto the list. Of course, we've already mentioned Cherokee Purple. 4th of July is one I hadn't grown for a long time. 3 years ago, I planted it again. Last year, I planted it again, and it did extremely well both years. 4th of July does, in fact, ripen by the first week of July. It's beautiful fruit, 4-ounce. It's moved up onto my recommended list. So those are some minor changes. And one I'm definitely adding this year for its 3rd year is Genuine. Genuine is one of these heirloom hybrids. It's a cross between Brandywine and something else, Castelluto Genovese. And that combination turned out to be a wonderful, beautiful fruit, high productivity, 2 years in a row. So Genuine is in my 3rd year trial program this year.
And how do you spell genuine?
Genu, Genu, capital W-I-N-E, Genuine.
Just like it sounds. All right. For my third year trial, and I think it's going to make it, is Jetstar. I like Jetstar.
You gave me one of those last year, I think is the one you brought over to me, or we grew it, one or the other, and we were very impressed. It's a good producer, and it's not a huge plant, I found. It was not a monster plant. So it's only had 1 year. It's moving into my second year trials, but it's been a very good one for me. And you mentioned New Girl. I think over the last couple of years, we've been migrating over to that one. And twice now I've done Early Girl and New Girl side by side. Same size cage so I can take pictures of them and everything. Which one ripened first? Who gave more fruit? Both years, New Girl outgrew and outperformed Early Girl, and the fruit is seemingly identical. We are only talking about a 6-ounce round red tomato here, so there's not a whole lot to distinguish them. New Girl definitely outproduced Early Girl last year, and so it's I hate to say this, I don't want to say it's going to replace Early Girl, but I'll do a third trial of the two side by side this year, and we'll get a complete report in September and October.
Yeah, New Girl's 6 ounces. The Jetstar gets about 8 ounces. And it is a fairly small plant, about 4.5 feet, but it is an indeterminate.
Yeah, and they both keep producing reasonably steadily. My experience with Early Girl in the early years here when I would plant it every year, good crop early, as expected, long gap, and then another crop if you kept it going well late in the summer and into the fall. But New Girl did set fruit later, longer, and gave more fruit overall. And they're a very similar style of fruit. So I think we may finally have a competitor to the crown. How long has Early Girl been on the market? Mid-1970s? It's
become one of that, yes.
Every now and then on a nursery Facebook group, someone will post, what are your top 5 tomatoes? And almost everywhere in the country, Sun Gold and Early Girl are on that list. They seem to do well almost anywhere.
Now, here's a question I'm sure you get every year about this time of the year. Mm-hmm. Somebody comes in and says, I have a family. I've never grown tomatoes before. There's 4 of us. What should we grow?
Juliet and Champion.
Just 2? Okay.
For starters. Yeah, well, I suggest you grow 30, but let's start with 2. Those 2 in particular. And the reason I come back to those, Juliet, you've grown it. It does well every year. It produces a huge amount of fruit. You can pretend it's a cherry tomato if you want because it's small, even though it's a solid, meaty type of tomato. So it cooks really well. Freezes great. I used to call it my empty nest tomato. For people who used to grow a lot of tomatoes, now the kids have grown up. I got to plant 1 tomato, but the wife and I travel. Okay, plant Juliet. It'll still be there, still producing when you get back, and I guarantee it'll do well. So that one is just phenomenal. It was introduced probably 30 plus years ago. It has turned into one of the best new introductions in years. And the reason I mentioned Champion is that it does grow well and yield well every year for me, almost no matter what the weather is. And it's one that continues late into the fall, even into the almost early winter. So Champion is a very successful. And there's plenty of others that I would do for sure. But those 2, I just know that people are almost sure to do well with.
All right, let's bring up the purple elephant in the room.
The purple elephant in the room, the purple tomato?
Yes, the purple tomato. They're expanding their repertoire, I see.
Yes, Norfolk Healthy Produce is the name of the company that introduced the first genetically modified tomato for the home garden market, at least in the United States. And we were just calling it the purple tomato from Norfolk Healthy Produce because that was its official name. And it did very well. I think I gave you one. You're going to have to buy the seed on this one. Very few places are going to have the plants. I believe they're partnering with a couple of vendors to eventually get the plants out to garden centers. So they might already be underway on that. But they're not going to be cheap because they are genetically modified. The seed is not cheap, but you can grow it easily. And they are quite successful here, at least in the valley. Everybody's liked the color of the fruit. It's spectacular. The purple fruit flesh all the way through. Dries beautifully, by the way. If you're into sun drying, it turned out to be great for that purpose. And the consistent feedback we got and we've given to the company is mild flavor. Well, the 2 new ones that they have this year have richer flavor, we're told. Then one of them is golden in color because they've bred in more of the yellow pigment that's healthy for you. And these look like they're going to be good ones. I think this company is onto something with these improved color, improved anthocyanin content, and extremely high yield, at least for us in the Sacramento Valley. So far, they've been very good performers. As
seen on TV, they're selling the plants on QVC.
That's right. Yes, they are doing them that way. So you can buy them that way if you want to. You can also buy the seed. You can go online and find the seed. Selected nurseries sell the seed, and I happen to know one in Davis that does. They're not cheap, but you don't need very many. I would suggest people try this. I think you'll be interested and pleased.
How, by the way, is the seed and plant supply doing in the year 2026?
Well, because we had 3 weeks in March that were 20 to 25 degrees above average temperature, demand for summer vegetables was off the chart way earlier than it should have been. I mean, people were coming in the first and second week of March looking for tomatoes and peppers and squash and melons and eggplant and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of nurseries just threw up our hands and said, here, they're over here. Buy them if you want. Listen to us. Here's a sign above them that says when we think you should plant them. So 2 of my 3 suppliers 2 weeks ago sent out a note saying they were completely out of inventory of summer vegetables going into the first week of April. And don't worry, this is the important part of this. There is more coming along. It's not just one crop. So we're not all running out for the season, but there's going to be a little gap in production, particularly from the smaller local growers. So you might not find that one variety you're looking for in the first week of April. They promise us young seedlings will be along by about April 7th, and everybody should be fully stocked again as we get get closer to the actual proper planting time in the Sacramento Valley, which is Fred Hoffman's birthday.
April 28th.
There you go.
I would think that another problem that your industry has avoided so far is these plants and seeds don't have to go through the Strait of Hormuz. But
that's true.
But fertilizer does.
Yeah, fertilizer prices are skyrocketing, but there's a temporary availability issue on some of the vegetables. Now, I would, with customers who were okay with nuance, I would say tomatoes are the ones I'm least concerned about going into soil that's cold because I know that as it warms up, they will recover. I really don't like to even sell, much less see you planting peppers, eggplant, definitely not melons. Don't put watermelons in the ground early. Winter squash, okra, things like that really need warm soil. I mean, we need it warmer than tomatoes need it for those types of things. If you've purchased them, move them up to a bigger pot, keep them in a warmer spot, wait till the soil is warmer, and we're consistently having the weather that they like, which is typically the month of May here. Tomatoes in the ground, what's going to happen with the weather we're having right now? These colder nights, you're going to turn kind of purplish. That'll technically be a phosphorus deficiency, but it's not something you correct. It's just cold soil causing it. They will stop growing. They'll become more vulnerable to things that feed at night. So get out there and monitor for earwigs and snails and slugs. And once it warms up, they'll probably be fine. That might be a good time to give them a little shot of fertilizer. The other is peppers. You put them in early. I've done this many times just to test it. They never really recover. The ones you plant a month later always outperform them. So if you've purchased anything other than tomatoes, put it in a bigger pot, keep it close to the house, wait till at least Mother's Day to get that in the ground.
The one issue I would take with that is don't start your squash seeds early in containers because if they get root bound, they too will stop growing.
Yes, your other frequent guest on the show is very adamant about that, and I strongly agree with Dr. Flower, Professor Debbie Flower, about the problem with overgrown pumpkins, squash, melons, and cucumbers. If they're root bound in a pot, they don't come back from it. I'd rather have you go buy a new one, obviously, or wait and buy one and only get it when you're ready to put it in the ground within a couple to a few days of buying it. But peppers, I frequently will move up to a gallon can or some bigger pot, and some of them stay in those all the way into June. The members of Cucurbitaceae really are stunted by cold temperatures, and if anything happens to the growing point, you might as well start over. I mean, if you lose the growing point on a cucumber or a melon, it has to form an entire new one, and probably you're better off with a healthy new plant. I really do discourage nurseries from selling root-bound Cucurbitaceae, and I would discourage the consumers from buying them.
And if you are a customer looking at squash plants of that sort at the nursery, choose the smallest ones. They have a less of a chance of being root-bound.
We start them about 10 days before we put them out for sale.
Okay, that's about right. Yeah.
In a greenhouse, that's what it takes. They come up in 3 days. They're already forming new leaves in 5 to 7. They're beginning to put on new growth in 10. That's the best time to buy them. And, if your nursery's okay with your checking the root systems, go ahead and do that. If you buy a root-bound plant, whether it's a tomato or a squash or something else, and you take it home to plant it, when you take it out of that pot to put it in the next size up or in the ground, tear those roots apart, break them up, break the circling roots, be a little ruthless with them, water very carefully and see how it goes. And don't hesitate to just pop another one in. If that cucumber or that melon, or especially the watermelons, if it just isn't taking off, if it's not flourishing, you should probably just get yourself a new plant. People often wonder, why not just plant the seeds directly in the ground? Well, I have a lot of issues with that myself. When I put seeds directly in the ground, there's a lot of wildlife here on my farm that thinks I've done it for them. So I prefer to get the plants off to a little bit more of a head start, even cover them if necessary, with some kind of protective cage when I first put them in, because there's so many things that like to feed on them. But I do highly recommend that you go out at midnight, warn your neighbors with a high beam flashlight, and check your vegetable plants, because you'll be surprised at what's feeding on them. And unfortunately, if it's a young plant and the soil's cold, the plant won't grow very fast. The damage is going to be worse. But you can at least go out there and squish those earwigs and pick those snails and throw them over the fence into your neighbor's yard.
And the slugs, too.
Sure.
Yeah.
My mother would salt the slugs. I don't recommend that, but she would salt them.
It's a waste of salt. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, not good for the soil either.
I think we have planted our tomatoes, vocally speaking.
Yeah. A couple of things that you don't need to do. You don't need to stick Epsom salts in there. You don't need to put, let's see, what's my favorite one recently? A cup of sugar. That was a weird one from YouTube. You don't need to put a cup of sugar. Yeah. I'll leave it to Debbie Flower to explain why it's not necessary to put sugar under tomato plants. Tums tablets, lime, calcium, bone meal. None of those are necessary. Mostly they're harmless. The sugar seems odd. I'd be very curious what effect that would have. The logic of the YouTube personality was it'll make the fruit sweeter. So I thought, oh, okay, so let's add some basil, some oregano, and we'll have our plants producing their own spaghetti sauce. No, that doesn't work. It doesn't work that way. Most of those are pretty harmless, nor do you need high phosphorus plant foods or anything like that. Just give it some kind of nitrogen, water carefully, and you're off to a good start.
Life was so much easier 20, 30 years ago when we only had to deal with Jerry Baker.
There's a trip down memory lane.
But now everybody is homemade expert.
Yeah. The line we're getting now is, I looked it up on ChatGPT and it said,
oh, yeah. There you go.
And I reply, with respect to horticultural information, they are not reliable sources, but they certainly do sound confident, don't they?
Yeah, if you start delving into a lot of these AI sources, most of the information seems to be coming from Reddit.
I think so. I'm not sure. I mean, I've tested this a little bit, and what I'm finding is that they certainly don't use the references I would use, like extension publications, Master Gardener sites, ucanr.edu, places like that. More to the point, one, you have to be an expert to know they're wrong. So that's the first part of the problem. And we get back to that whole thing. This is really a key thing for the whole show. Gardening is local. So it's very hard for a algorithm, not knowing where you are and what your conditions are, to give you good advice. Whereas ucanr.edu, hey, a lot of those sites are UC Davis. So we know that they're useful here and wherever you're listening. North Carolina State has a great extension site. I mean, those are the places to go for actual evidence-based information for your garden.
There you go. One of the Farmer Fred garden rules is, if it works for you, fine, but keep an open mind.
There you go.
All right, Don, I think we've done it with the tomatoes this year. I think everybody should have a good tomato year. I just have a feeling that the weather will be okay for tomato production this year, and all we have to fear is ourselves.
And the early demand is definitely there, so I'm glad to see the enthusiasm. I have to say that in the past, we've been told that strong demand for food plants means there's going to be a recession. Maybe you should buy your canning jars now.
All right, yes. Well, that's part of the trend of getting away from plastics and going to glass.
Yeah, excellent. All right.
Don, thanks so much. Don Shores with Redwood Barn Nursery in Davis, California. Check out his website, redwoodbarn.com. He has a radio show, sort of.
Yeah, that's the Davis Garden Show on KDRT, which is a little local public radio station broadcasting out of Davis, California.
But it's on the internet.
It is on the internet. Yes, we live stream and there's a podcast.
So there you go. Yeah, okay. And the name of it again is?
You can find it at davisgardenshow.com.
Oh, well, there you go. All right, you got it. Don Shore, thanks so much for your help on tomatoes today.
Great to be here.